you assess his weaknesses and strengths for us? No. Let me just, of course, I'm not going to just say that. But most of it, I guess this is a political event, but my speech was not about politics. I understand questions will be, and I understood that probably would be the first question, something like that. I mean, this race, as all political campaigns, it's who's on your side. And I will argue that nobody's fought harder for Ohio, for helping small businesses create jobs, for helping workers get value work. I am today, I unfortunately have to leave right at 1 o'clock because I brought Google to Cleveland to do an all-day workshop for entrepreneurs and people who started businesses and want to grow them, and for people looking for jobs. A big part of my job is doing things like that. I will make the contrast between that record and whoever the primary opponent might have been, self-funder or not. That's what the race will be. Would you agree to debate him? Absolutely. I've debated every time I've run for office. I've debated when my opponent is unknown. I've been counseled by party leaders in the past, don't debate if the other candidate's unknown, because you're helping that other candidate get better known. I believe if you put your name in the ballot, you have an obligation to stand in at least once, and most times I've done it 3 or 4 times, to stand in front of audiences with journalists asking tough questions. I, of course, will do that again. I know my opponent was not willing to debate in the primary because he had those advantages, but I have no idea if he'll want to debate in the general election, but I will be there debating whether he is or not.
Here's an interesting question from the audience. What is President Trump like in one-on-one conversations? Is he receptive to ideas and different opinions, or is he exactly what we see on Twitter or on TV?
That's a lot of questions at once. Okay. I've talked to him first on the phone 3 months after the election, and the whole conversation was pretty one way and pretty much telling me how he won Ohio. 3 months later, and I fought back after that. And I remember we all remember, I'm sure Bernard and all of you remember your first election if you run for office, right? And I remember after my first election to the legislature, for like 3 days, all I want to talk about was how smart I was, I won my election. And then I realized nobody really cared except for me. So I stopped doing it. I've had 3 meetings in the White House with the president, one on trade, one on opioids, and one on taxes. And with the president and 8 or 10 senators, mostly Republicans, a handful of Democrats, each of those meetings, he seemed to agree with kind of every idea people put forward. And I didn't see a lot of depth of understanding of these issues. I was quoted in a very conservative paper this year, today, in the Washington Examiner that Professor Cohen was quoted to. I said in this article that, because I've written a book about trade, I've been involved in trade issues forever, that I was against NAFTA before President Trump knew what NAFTA was 25 years ago. So I'll just leave it at that.
Any chance of the DREAM Act passing this year?
I hope. I wish. What Abraham Lincoln was, I know this doesn't have a lot to do with the DREAM Act, you think, by quoting Lincoln, but Lincoln used to, his staff used to say, Mr. President, you got to stay in the White House and win the war and free the slaves and preserve the Union. Lincoln said, no, I need to go out and get my public opinion baths. And I remember early in his papacy, Pope Francis said, he admonished his parish priests to go out and smell like the flock. And I wish my colleagues and I wish people in the White House would meet some dreamers and talk to them about their lives. I met a young woman, I'm guessing mid-20s, grew up in Toledo. She was 4 when her family came from Guatemala. She doesn't know anything about Guatemala except anecdotally from her parents, and she speaks Spanish because her parents were from there. She's married, she has a 1-year-old child. She owns a car, they both have jobs, they both are active in their church. And she said every day she goes to work, she goes out and before she starts her car, she checks the brake light, she checks the headlights, she checks the turn signals. When she stops at a stop sign, she counts to 3. She never speeds. Just like those of you in this audience who are African American, you taught your kids to drive, differently from how my parents taught me to drive when I was growing up. You taught your, particularly if you have sons, every one of you in this room, I'm sure if you're African American, Ron, or any of you, you taught your sons, if you have sons, when you're stopped by, keep your hands, all the things that, and the anxiety that the White House and others have injected into these young people's lives. And these are entrepreneurs, they're workers, they're students, they're in our military, and why are we doing this to them? And it's just forget politics. It's just morally reprehensible what we are doing to these kids. So I'm hopeful. I think that I think there's still a path forward. Fortunately, the president has moved the date back. I hope it doesn't take pictures on that. I hope it doesn't take video on the 6 o'clock news when ICE agents are removing these kids and taking them from their homes and taking them from their families. We've seen far too much of that already where children, my son-in-law is a refugee from El Salvador, and he came when he was 10. He's a citizen now. He's done everything right, as so many immigrants have for our country. And for this mean-spirited, this coming out of Washington is a bad chapter in our country's history.
A couple of related political questions. Are Democrats ready for 2018? And what can Democrats do to improve voter turnout in 2018?
I think something's going to happen that hasn't happened before, and that is on the issue of guns. I have seen, the gun lobby, every election I run in spends millions of dollars against me. They will spend millions of dollars this year against me. But this year may be different, and I know that position probably cost me votes, that position that I've taken, voting for the assault weapon ban, voting for the Brady bill, standing up to those special interests. But this year, I think young people, because of Parkland, young people are going to start walking up to politicians and saying, how much money you get from the NRA? And they're going to put that money, they're going to put those answers online, and I think you're going to see a whole lot of young voters voting because they see a president where the White House has a stench of bigotry. They see a president and an administration where they deny climate change. They see a president that opposes civil rights and human rights. And they see a president and a White House and a majority in Congress owned by the gun lobby. And I think that with the work that all of us are going to do on a grassroots level is what's going to turn people out. And I think that there will be a significantly larger turnout in this off-year election than there was in 2014.
Another political question. As we just wrapped up the election cycle and get prepared for the next one, we see, unfortunately, more negative attack ads. Why do we hear that it works when so many people don't like them?
Say the last part of it.
They want to know why do we hear that attack ads work, but yet people keep saying they don't like the ads.
Both statements are true. They work and people don't like them. Say it this way. I came here, I talked positive things, I talked about what I'm trying to do, and the questions and answers often end up playing off one candidate against another. And I'm always willing to do that. I think elections are about contrast. Here's what I'm going to do, here's what my opponent's going to do, here's what I've done, here's what the other party's done. To me, it's about contrast. Too often it has an unseemly side where too many candidates get personal and get negative. You certainly saw that in the governor's primary in Ohio, on the Republican side. You saw that. I have never seen a primary that nasty in Ohio between Mary Taylor and Mike DeWine. And DeWine had a lot more money and a lot more endorsements. I assume that's why he won. But I've seen a Republican Party that in the last 20 years, in the last 10 years especially, the way it's played to race and the way it's played on negative issues has accelerated what already was a too toxic environment. And it makes it harder, it makes it less likely that people vote. And this will sound partisan, but when fewer people vote, Republicans usually do better. And don't think that there's not some move in the Republican Party that the negative attack ads from Republicans, they hope decrease turnout. Look at it this way. If McDonald's said, about one of its competitors, don't eat there, you'll get trichinosis. And then the competitor said about McDonald's, don't eat there, you'll get E. coli. People quit eating at all fast food restaurants. Or if Delta said, don't fly United, they crash too often, and United hit back to Delta and said, don't fly. People fly. I mean, so politicians attack each other, and turnout goes down. And don't think it's not in the interest of one of the political parties to depress turnout.
How do you feel about a Medicare 55 plan for public workers to help maintain strong public pension funds in Ohio?
Thank you for that question. I 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago, when I was early in my House career, I worked with Senator Kennedy, Senator Moynihan, and President Clinton on a Medicare at 55 proposal for opening up Medicare for everybody at 55 voluntarily. So when do you need Medicare? When are you at your most vulnerable? And that's you're 58, you're 62, you lose your insurance, you're getting to the age where you need health care more, and you're not yet eligible for Medicare. I remember meeting a woman in Youngstown at Town Hall, and she's 63, and she put her hand up. She said, I hold 2 jobs, I work really hard, I don't have insurance, I just want to live until I'm 65. Not I want to live till I'm 65 so I can see to travel or see my grandkids. I want to live till I'm 65 so I have insurance. I mean, how insane is that our society's put her and others in that position? So we had this legislation. We never could get it moving in Republican Congress. 2009, Medicare at 55 was in the Affordable Care Act. I negotiated it with moderate Democrats. Republicans weren't. It was Obamacare, so Republicans had walked away from the tables, And we had Medicare at 55 voluntary in the Affordable Care Act. And Joe Lieberman, always a straight shooter. Joe Lieberman, at the last minute, pulled his support, and we lost it by 1 vote. Otherwise, we would have voluntary Medicare at 55, and we would have a whole different looking healthcare system that would work better for people. So I'm sorry, one more thing. So I am now the sponsor of the bill on a pilot project for police and fire who retire. The average police and fire, I believe the average firefighter and police officer retires between 51 and 53. That's about the average. Because their jobs are more perilous than most, maybe not more perilous than coal miners, maybe they are, but they retire at an early age. They've had their 20 plus years. They can retire earlier than school workers can or teachers can or other public employees because of the peril of their jobs. And so I would like to do for them at 55, partly because the states are now pulling away on their health insurance. The states are going to say, we're going to block grant your money instead of you're going to pay for your insurance. And block granting, it means they will run short of what they need for their health care. So they have come to me to kind of resuscitate that bill and do a pilot project for police and fire at 55. I'd like to see it broader, but I want to see if we can get even that much now, sooner rather than later.
Can you speak to your thoughts regarding upcoming Supreme Court ruling on the elimination of union agency fees? Should the court rule against the unions, what can be done to counter such a ruling?
I know that unions are preparing for a court decision made by this court that is totally dominated by corporate interests, and virtually every, I'm not a lawyer, but virtually every time there's been an issue that affects workers, the court has decided on management's side against workers. That's not breaking news to people, but that's what's happened. When the last time that was in front of the court, Justice Scalia died, and then Mitch McConnell did what had never happened in American history, just refused to entertain the thought of a Democrat appointing a Supreme Court judge, and just blocked it as a majority leader can do. I'm concerned about this. I think that unions need to sort of recalibrate how they work with their members in ways that keep them in the tent, keep the free riders from riding free in a way that they choose to do, that I think can work for workers and blunt as much of this decision as they can.
Here's someone who typed up a question. Thank you. Senator Brown, I deeply appreciate your bipartisan efforts, especially with Senator Portman, but I'm asking for your advice. This person is a voluntary advocate for a nonprofit, and he or she says that they call, email, and have visited your Cleveland and Washington offices, your staff is fine. But the question is, how can we be more effective in engaging Senator Portman's aides on these issues, for which to seem to not seem to have too much concern? I'll leave it right there.
Rob's been good to work with. I'll start with that for me. I know that on the big issues we don't agree. We agree on a lot of Ohio-specific issues that are big and small. I think back to the activism I've seen this year, some of the last 15 months, something I've never seen in my life during the Betsy DeVos, after Betsy DeVos was nominated, and we were considering her confirmation. Betsy DeVos is maybe, in my mind, maybe the worst Trump nominee, but then it's sort of an eight-way tie for first. But we got to Betsy DeVos, we got 260 calls and emails for her and 36,000 against her. And I assume that was not too different all over the country, and she was confirmed in a party line vote. I'm thinking one or two Republicans voted no, and then the tie was broken by Vice President, if I remember. Is that right? You're not. That's right. But I think that I have to keep that activism up. And if when you write me, when you call me, demand that we answer. Come to town halls, come to meetings like this, go to our offices, do rallies, demonstrations, whatever. I think all of that. I mean, we have seen an engagement and activism like we've never seen in this country. It's more on my side of the political aisle than Rob's side. But it's important that I don't have any specific new advice from what you're doing, but don't give up, keep calling, keep asking for responses, keep writing, keep emailing, write handwritten notes, do whatever we do to engage in politics and in government in this country.
Share your thoughts on the cuts to the CHIP program, that's Children's Health Insurance Program, announced this week by the president.
This is all part of the tax cut scam. I mean, it was a scam. I sat on that committee. I had back and forth with Orrin Hatch on that committee, whom I now co-chair with, so it's nothing personal. My wife and I one time sort of figured out the best way to look at this job is to kind of have the construct is whom you're fighting for and what you're fighting against. I don't want to fight against any one of my colleagues, even though I almost never agree with, well, maybe Ted Cruz, but I almost never agree with some of them at all. But I want to get along, and so it's never fighting them personally. It's fighting what they're doing, and I know whom I represent and whom I fight for. But I see. So this tax cut was done pretty much in the dead of night. I mean, there were markup hearings and all, but they were pretty phony. The bill was written in where I'm on the Senate floor right here, straight out behind me, down the hall is Mitch McConnell's office, 75 feet maybe. That's where the bill was written, there in Ryan's office. It was written by lobbyists. The banking industry especially did well. So we see the biggest Wall Street banks in this country making their biggest profits ever, getting a huge tax cut and pushing Congress to continue to slice away at the Dodd-Frank consumer protection and stability of the financial system law. And now, after the tax cut, knowing it would blow $1.5 trillion hole in the budget, they knew that. One thing that's pretty amazing about budget deficits, when there's a Democratic president, budget deficits, according to the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and I've read the Wall Street Journal for 25 years, so I didn't know what I'm talking about here, but for the Wall Street Journal editorial page talks about how awful deficits are when there's a Democratic president, but when the deficits are even bigger with a Republican president, as history shows that they are, we'll grow out of those deficits. I mean, the hypocrisy about deficits is unbelievable. So we pass a tax cut where 80% of the benefits go to the richest 1%, which accelerates the outsourcing of jobs, shutting down in Barberton and moving overseas, and blows a hole in the federal budget. What's our answer after that? Our answer is you go after programs that affect working families. You start to work to privatize or raise the eligibility age for Medicare and Social Security. You cut funding for Lake Erie. You cut funding for food stamps. And now after the new budget is law, the tax cut and then the other spending bill, there's something called a rescission where that president can go back or the Congress can go back and take parts of that bill and put it on the floor for a vote to make cuts in things that Congress has already voted. They look where they go to make those cuts. They go after things like the Children's Health Insurance Program, which has been bipartisan. I mean, Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy and Jay Rockefeller were the ones that wrote this law 25 years ago, and it was very bipartisan. It's always been bipartisan. All of a sudden, now it's not. And we had to struggle to get them to renew it, which they did, finally. It's been partly because some of us used the tax bill to leverage and almost shame them, and you're giving these tax cuts, you won't even renew the Children's Health Insurance Program. The Children's Health Insurance Program is for kids whose parents have jobs. If they weren't, these are not kids whose parents get Medicaid because they have insurance. These are families whose parents are making $8, $10, and $12 an hour in jobs where there is no insurance, where the parents aren't getting insurance. So the government stepped in and said, okay, the sons and daughters of those families, at least we provide insurance to them. It's cheap. Children cost very little, taken in the aggregate for insurance. Of course, you have the occasional case where it's very expensive, but overall, it's by far the cheapest demographic pool to insure. There's no excuse that we would go back and cut spending on CHIP. I mean, I don't even understand how people that vote for things like that and how they look at them. I mean, it's a bunch of members of Congress who get paid well and have really good insurance paid by taxpayers, thank you very much, and then they're willing to cut CHIP. I just think that should almost be disqualifying for them to even, I mean, it's not, but for them to hold public office.
On Tuesday, we just passed issue 1, which will change how we draw our congressional districts. What effect do you think that will have? Do you think that the issue goes far enough, or do you think more should be done?
Well, I think more should be done because I'm not an expert on this, so I voted for it. I like it. I don't know the details on the ballot issue. I don't know how it's going to play out. I think it was a good thing generally. And I think where we are as a state on redistricting is pretty abhorrent. In 2012, Barack Obama carried Ohio by 160,000 votes. He won 4 districts and lost 12, even though he won the state by 160,000. So think of the math. He won 4 districts by 160,000 in the aggregate, more than he lost 12 districts. And right here is a very good example. They took, I think we're in Congresswoman Fudge's district right here, I would be almost sure, right? And they took her district, which was already a 45% non-white district and a 70% Democratic district. These are both estimates. And they snaked her district, not quite down the median strip of I-77, but more or less. I think they took in LeBron's home in Richfield and that area. I think it went through the Revere School District, I'm not sure, into the city of Akron, making Marsh's district 10% more Democratic with 10% more African American, more or less, and took those away from the old Betty Sutton district, a district I represented for 4 years until I ran for the Senate, making that district a Republican and enabling Congressman Renacci to beat Congresswoman Sutton in a district that was drawn for him. And it's the way there's just so many better ways to do redistricting. This is this is an improvement, to be sure. It's probably a vast improvement. I'm sure we can do it better in the future also.
Here's a question regarding Akron-based First Energy. What are you doing to keep First Energy nuclear and coal plants operating by relaxing EPA requirements, FUCO requirements, to keep the jobs in the communities they support?
Well, it's a myth that the war on coal that Blankenship in West Virginia and others suggest is not a war by environmentalists. The war on coal is the price of natural gas. I mean, the reason that coal is not competitive increasingly is not that coal miners aren't efficient. They are. Not that coal operations are not efficient. They mostly are. It's the price of natural gas and the $3 and $4 cost band in natural gas. As far as the eye can see, we think will be priced. That's why we have seen so many new natural gas plants. I think there are 5 in Ohio, 1 up in Oregon, near Toledo, 1 in near Lordstown, where the GM plant is, one near Carrollton, one in, I think, Wellsville, I believe, along the river, and there's a fifth one I'm forgetting now. I believe the fifth one's under construction, and those are 500 megawatt plants that are comparable to a 500 megawatt coal plant. And we also are seeing for solar, a utility, a manufacturing plant in Toledo, the most, Toledo's close to number one in the country in solar jobs. This company is the largest solar manufacturer in the country. They are opening 4 or 5 in the next, I think, 2 years, solar generating electricity plants, all between, not precise about this, 100 and 250 more or less megawatts. So 5 of them together will probably be 700, 800, 900 megawatts. So these are big plants. So that's become the competition. And I think that, and I mean, I fight all the time to help those coal miners in those jobs, to help keep them there, to help them if they lose their jobs. I am concerned about what happens down the road there because of the price of natural gas and the fact that renewables are becoming more and more competitive and reliable. Western Ohio has a number of wind turbines. When you can go to Van Wert or Lima in that area of the state, the windiest, flattest part of Ohio that's most propitious, I believe, for wind turbines. You're seeing more and more of them there. So we're seeing a change in the energy market. I'm for all of the above. I think that it's important we do that right. And I think while Ohio legislature's done some, typically for them, idiotic things on energy, I think that the private sector has really carried this in a way that is far better than right-wing politicians who do the bidding of the Koch brothers every week.
Just a couple more questions here. What can we do through you to hold government departments more accountable? And the example they cite here is the $40,000 privacy booth at the EPA.
There are so many examples of the EPA. I just, there was an Ohio politician, Wayne Rivers, this guy named Jumpin' Joe Ferguson, who was Tom Ferguson. I served with Tom Ferguson, the state auditor. His father was auditor earlier. And he was accused of hiring his family. He said, I don't believe in nepotism except in my own family. And I am just amazed at these elected officials like the Secretary of HUD, who spent tens of thousands of dollars redecorating his office. And then the next week calls on cutting spending on low-income families' housing vouchers. 25% of Americans who rent, higher percentage in Ohio, 25% of Americans who rent spend at least half their income on housing. So what happens? One thing goes wrong. The car breaks down, they go to a payday lender, or they miss their rent payment, or both. Or something else goes wrong. Their kid gets sick. They don't have any family leave or sick days. Kid gets sick. Do we send the kid to school and miss work? And I didn't miss 10% of my pay. This mommy, all the kinds of questions that we put so many people through in our government, spending lots of money on itself. This, from the top on down, spending lots of money on ourselves, and then not taking care of people that really need help. And I put this president's cabinet at the top of that list. Carson and Pruitt and the private plane crowd, which is most of them. I mean, I know a lot of these were billionaires coming in, and they are used to a certain lifestyle, but pay for your lifestyle yourself and don't have taxpayers do it.
This will be the final question, and it's not political. Your official biography says you're a Cleveland Indians fan. I would remind you that you're in Akron. What do you think of LeBron and the Cavs?
Of course I love. I mean, how can you not love watching LeBron and what's happened? And they match up against Boston better than Philadelphia, they say. I don't know. And I know the Boston fans are going to whine, well, Kyrie Irving was hurt. Well, that's not our problem, man. But the Indians, I'm talking about that. My email address is damn Yankees. I mean, I grew up really hating Yankees. I hated the Yankees so much growing up. We lived in Mansfield, and it was driving up. Well, then when I was a little kid, we had to drive up old Route 42 through Ashland and Medina and Parma, Brunswick and Parma into Cleveland. And but I never saw, until I was 18 and could drive or go with friends, I never saw the Yankees play because my dad didn't want Mickey Mantle to get 15 cents out of his ticket. That is legitimate Yankee hating. I'll leave it at that.
Senator, thank you.